Inside America's Boardrooms, the informational show for board members and corporate secretaries. Brought to you with Knowledge Partners, Diligent, PwC, Center for Audit Quality, the Conference Board, and Corporate Board Member. Along with content contributors Equilar, Meridian Compensation Partners, Wilson Sonsini Goodrich and Rosati, Donnelly Financial Solutions, and the Society for Corporate Governance.
Welcome to this week's edition of Inside America's Boardrooms. I'm Doug Chia, Executive Director of the Conference Board Governance Center. Your host for today, standing in for TK Kerstetter, our regular host. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this show being filmed here at the Conference Board Studios in New York City. And today we're going to be talking about a very important topic, and that's the topic of quarterly earnings guidance and the recent call by Jamie Dimon and Warren Buffett to end this practice. Joining me today is Chuck Nathan, Senior Advisor at Finsbury and adjunct professor at Columbia and Yale Law School. So Chuck, thanks so much for being here.
My pleasure, Doug.
So let's jump into the topic here. This concept or this call to action of getting rid of quarterly earnings guidance by corporations, this is not a new idea. There are a number of groups that have either endorsed this or promoted this in the past. And so now we have Jamie Dimon, chairman of JP Morgan and chairman of the Business Roundtable, and Warren Buffett, who everybody knows, saying this again. And so, why again now? Is there anything really different this time that's prompting this?
I don't think there's anything different. I think this is a issue that has been in the forefront of a lot of people's minds for any number of years now. I think you can go back probably 10, maybe longer years and find people advocating elimination of quarterly earnings in favor of semi-annual earnings reports because of the focus it produces on the part of corporations and investors on quarterly results and where pennies may matter, and that can be very time-consuming and energy-consuming on the part of both the corporations who have to prepare for this event and on the part of the investors who are under siege effectively 4 times a year because they follow so many companies, and most companies follow a calendar year quarterly basis. So everybody's quarterly earnings come out in a fairly tight spread of a couple weeks, and they're inundated by these quarterly calls and having to digest them and report them, et cetera, et cetera. So a huge amount of energy goes into this structure.
I've been involved in this process and seen what you just described. But a lot of people, some of the investors I talk to say, "Oh, we don't really follow this quarterly up and down. It's really just a tool for the sell side analysts." But clearly, this practice is very entrenched. So if it's just a kind of a sell side, satisfaction, why is this so entrenched?
I'm skeptical that it's really a sell side phenomena. I'm sure the sell side is very invested in it because it allows them to publish research reports and, in effect, peddle their wares, and prove their value to their clients, who are the investors of the buy side. But I think a lot of buy-side investors feel under tremendous pressure to perform. I'm not talking about the actively managed funds, obviously not the quantitative and passive funds, index funds, who have no performance anxiety. Or if they have a performance anxiety, it's called the market. But the active investors need to beat the benchmarks. That's the whole name of the game. They can only bring assets into house to be managed if they can perform better than the benchmarks, better than the index funds. If they can't outperform the index funds, they're going to lose assets to the index funds. They're under huge pressure. And for many of them, the quarterly insight becomes a possible advantage, a possible way of doing their job better, or what they think their job is, and doing it better. And while they may wish the world was different, and maybe even half of them would say, we'd give it up, as long as the other half says, we're not going to give it up, they're sort of stuck.
Got it. And so, the Business Roundtable is the one that is coming out with and endorsing this call to end quarterly guidance. The Business Roundtable is made up of CEOs, not just CEOs, but some of the most prominent CEOs in the country. So can't that group of CEOs just say, okay, we're done here. We're not doing anymore. End of story. And, other CEOs throughout industry will follow. I mean, this is a group that, they could end this practice if they wanted to, so why don't they?
Well, I guess like many things, if every CEO in the country or in the world said, okay, we're all going to give it up at the same time, yes, but that's not the way it would work. So you have the Business Roundtable, let's say that's the 200 biggest or best or whatever companies, and they give it up. Other companies will seek to take advantage of that event to distinguish themselves, being they're, quote, more investor friendly, more willing to talk to their investors, more willing to provide information, and seek a competitive advantage. I think it's the same thing on the investor side. If some investors would give it up, others would seek a competitive advantage by not giving it up. So it's one of those things where it's everybody, where, this is where a regulation would work, but voluntary action, I think, gets undermined by people having to compete. They have to compete for the dollars of those investors because those dollars drive their stock price, and their stock price drives their compensation. And in many ways, their measure of value, their own self-worth, is so wrapped up in how is my stock doing. If your stock if you're Jack Welch, you say, look at what I did at GE, and the stock grew from here to here. And that proves I'm a great manager. That kind of thinking dies hard.
But you're right. I mean, internally, the amount of energy around these 4 dates and the way all the reporting and roll-up and consolidation systems are built, it's just incredible the amount of time this takes and arguably the toll it takes on the company.
Yeah, and look, and I think there's another perspective, again, from the investor point of view, the institutional investor point of view. In large part, for better or for worse, because of Reg FD, it's very, very hard for investors to find out what's going on in a company outside of the quarterly earnings period when companies are prepared to and do talk to investors. Obviously, they try to do it in a way that complies with FD. But off FD, it's much, much harder and more idiosyncratic. Can we find out what's going on? We heard there's this new great product. We want to know how it's doing. The company can't talk to us. They're not ready to make the announcement. So the 6-month blackout is going to be arguably adverse to the active investors, actively managed investors, and to the people who depend on them. I mean, your money, your savings, my savings, is effectively, a lot of it's in the stock market. And I want stocks to go up, not down. I want whatever mechanism I use for investing in the stock market, I want it to get the best results possible. So you have you have so much of our entire system, ecosystem, built on the stock market as the measuring rod for how companies are doing. And it's pretty hard to make that go away or to say, well, we can have, long windows where people are operating in the dark. People make investment decisions without really knowing, or because they're guessing, or because they hear rumors. So, from a transparency point of view, it's arguably better to have more often earnings.
And so, for valuation purposes, the investors need this information. So, well, Chuck, thanks so much for joining us today to talk about this important issue. And that'll conclude this episode of Inside America's Boardrooms. We hope you enjoyed the show, and we'll be back again next week here at the conference board to help you become a better board member or committee member. We'll see you then.
Join us again next week for Inside America's Boardrooms. Brought to you with Knowledge Partners, Diligent, PwC, Center for Audit Quality, the Conference Board, and Corporate Board Member, along with content contributors Equilar, Meridian Compensation Partners, Wilson Sonsini Goodrich and Rosati, Donnelly Financial Solutions, and the Society for Corporate Governance.